What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
Simple, maybe it looks strange, but the anti-lock braking system came to the aid of motorists not from somewhere, but from the railroad. It was there that it began to be used back in the 20s of the last century. Of course, the task of ABS of that time was different. Blocking the wheels of the train during braking did not send it into a skid, but practically destroyed cast iron wheels. And that's why the railroads first began to invent systems that would not allow the wheels to stand on the stakes when braking. And a little later the first ABS appeared in aviation, where it was very important to quickly stop the airplane on the run after landing, and not give it the opportunity to leave the runway. And only 50 years later, anti-lock brakes appeared on serial cars. At first as an option, and then, in 1978, it was put in the base on Mercedes-Benz W116 and on the 7 BMW. Now, as you know, this system was abandoned in Russia, but it is temporary. It is impossible to imagine a safe car without ABS, and this system is not so complicated that it is impossible to find a way out of the situation. So, what does ABS consist of? Three main subsystems can be distinguished: wheel speed sensors, control valves, and electronic control unit. And the principle of operation of the system is simple. Sensors, each on its own wheel, transmit signals which are processed by the control unit. If the signal indicates that the wheel has suddenly lost angular velocity too sharply, the unit commands the appropriate valve to release pressure to release the brake pad and prevent the wheel from locking up. The unit polls the sensors dozens of times per second, so the brake pedal can vibrate and rattle. The valve responds very quickly to the control unit's command, which is generated from the sensor signal. As a result, the wheel is not blocked, which prevents yaws and increases the controllability of the car. Of course, this is a slightly exaggerated scheme. Systems can be single dash, double dash, triple, or quadruple channel, according to the number of valves. Can include additional units, for example, a separate pump to maintain pressure in the brake system, or can be included directly in the brake system. However, the latter belongs to the category of technical adventurism and causes only tons of hatred from those who faced similar solutions. With SBC on Mercedes W211, with Mark II on Saab 9000, or with glitches of such tricky brakes on old Range Rover. Usually things are arranged in a much simpler way, as described in the previous paragraph. And that's all well and good, but even simple systems sometimes break down. What does the light bulb say? Let's start with the good news. Sometimes a burning ABS light has nothing to do with a system failure at all. This happens when the wheels on one axle are stationary and the other axle has been spinning fast and long enough, or one wheel has been spinning, which is more common. Yes, this is the classic situation of prolonged slippage when trying to drive out of mud or snow. After this action, often, let's face it, quite useless, the ABS control unit goes crazy with the sensor readings from the hubs and lights up the light just from not understanding what's going on. After a few kilometers the bulb goes out, and the system still works properly. There is nothing terrible here, it is normal. It is worse if there has been no slippage, but the system is complaining about something. If it happened after replacing the hub bearing, hub assembly, or brake disc in some cases, then the ABS signal is not random. Most likely, the person who did the work was not too attentive to the installation of either the ABS sensor or its rotor, cone, ring, pulse, or set rotor. They call this part differently. In the case of excessive curvature of the hands of the employee of the service station, this option is not only possible, but also very popular. If the light goes out after the ignition is turned on, but sometimes comes on while running, you need to check the wiring to the sensors. On new cars it rarely fails, but on cars that have heard on TV the screensaver with Listiev, the wiring has a right to be rotted out. Especially if this car was used for mud kneading or if it was operated in regions generous with winter reagents. Sometimes this floating error may not be related to ABS at all. The thing is that the cone is on the hub, and the sensor itself is very close to it, but on a stationary part of the car. The distance between them should be very accurately maintained, but if the hub bearing completely collapses, the hub starts to play And that causes the signal from the sensor to be intermittently lost. To be honest, I don't think that a person who has listened to the howling of a dying bearing for several hundred or even thousands of kilometers will worry when the ABS light is on, but still. Another reason that makes the light bulb light up on the move is the lack of signal due to contamination of the sensor or pulse rotor or breakage of the latter. In the former case, the repair boils down to cleaning the sensor and rotor. This can be done yourself, unless, of course, the removal of the wheel does not cause significant difficulties without this procedure. The sensor cannot get to the sensor. Both sensor and rotor can be cleaned with anything, kerosene, carb cleaner, old t-shirt. The main thing is not to damage the wiring. But if during cleaning it is found that the rotor is damaged, missing teeth, or it simply fell apart, it will, of course, have to be replaced. It is much more interesting to look for a failure in which the system fails to self-diagnose after the ignition is turned on. That is, one in which the ABS light does not go out a few seconds after the ignition is turned on or the engine is started. With a tester in hand, the most likely cause of failure of self-diagnosis is a sensor failure or a break in its wiring. It is easier to start checking with the sensor itself. The simplest method is to check its resistance with a multimeter in ohmmeter mode. Different sensors have different resistance, but on average it should be from 1 to 2 kΩ, more often even up to 1.5 kΩ. These numbers can be used as a guide, although, of course, it is better to know the resistance more accurately. But the main thing is not to see 0 or infinity on the multimeter. In the first case it will indicate a short circuit, in the second case, a break. It is useless to repair the ABS sensor, it will have to be replaced, which may not be very easy now because of the shortage of these parts for some cars. For your own pleasure, you can hang up the wheel and spin it. The resistance of its sensor should change. If this does not happen, then, probably, either something is wrong with the comb, or just the sensor is working, but very dirty. However, in this case, usually the ABS light bulb lights up on the move, not after a failed self-diagnosis. The wiring is more difficult to check. The ideal option is to check it with a connected sensor. But to do this, you need to remove the pad from the ABS unit and find in the terminal pairs of wires matching each of the wheel sensors, which are usually different in color. If at this stage the work seems already too complicated, it is better not to torture yourself and the car and go to the service. It is worth noting that if there is an unreliable contact in the circuit, it can be difficult to find the problem in this way. By the law of meanness at the time of diagnosis, the contact may turn out to be reliable. To at least somehow minimize this probability, you can ask an assistant to jiggle the car during the measurement. Of course, such oscillations will not completely exclude the possibility of an error, but sometimes it may help to notice the numbers changing by leaps and bounds on the tester screen. Most often there is no signal from the sensor if it itself has failed, or if its connector is oxidized and overgrown with dirt. On older cars, of course, can be anything, but on more or less fresh cars ABS control unit rarely fails and the wiring does not rot in a few years. And if it is the block that is to blame for the burning light bulb, it is better to go to the service. It is not so easy to repair it with your own hands. And it will be more difficult to detect this problem. Grandpa's control lamp will not be enough for diagnostics, and you will have to look for a decent scanner. In principle, now it is not difficult to do it. There are a lot of scanners on sale, and it remains only to choose the most suitable offer. Not a bad choice, for example, Rocadil Scan X, with which you can find the fault of ABS block, and check many other blocks, which on modern cars are enough in abundance. Well, if the wiring is to blame, you should not forget that under the bottom of the car living conditions are harsh, so you should not repair it by twisting. In conclusion, understanding why your ABS light is on is crucial for maintaining your vehicle's safety and performance. We discussed 3 primary reasons: a faulty ABS sensor, issues with the brake fluid level, and problems with the ABS module itself. By diagnosing these issues and taking the appropriate steps to fix them, you can ensure your braking system functions effectively. Remember, if you are ever in doubt, consulting a professional mechanic is always a wise choice. Stay safe on the road, and thank you for watching.